Aric Almirola announced that he will retire after the 2022 NASCAR Cup Series season. Josh Bilicki is officially going to 77 for Spire Motorsports, and SS Greenlight Racing has announced a massive partnership with Stewart-Haas Racing for the NASCAR Xfinity Series. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to another video. We've got a ton of NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. The first thing we're talking about is all the paint schemes, and we've got a lot of paint schemes to go over today. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those paint schemes really quickly. The first paint scheme we're going to take a look at is Dean Thompson's 2022 pipe group scheme that we're going to see in 2022. This truck paint scheme looks pretty good in my opinion. Of course, Dean Thompson will drive the 40 for Nice Motorsports. I think the paint scheme looks pretty decent in my opinion. I think the colors work pretty well, and I think it looks pretty good. I'm looking forward to see this paint scheme out on the racetrack throughout the 2022 season. The next paint scheme we're going to take a look at is Chase Elliott's 2022 Napa Auto Parts scheme that we'll see for 2022. This paint scheme looks pretty good in my opinion. It's not my favorite scheme I've ever seen. Again, I think that there are better Hendrick cars that have been revealed so far, but I think it looks pretty good in my opinion. I do like the blue. I just wish that they would have changed. I don't like the white background. That's one thing I will, in regards to Napa schemes, I've not overall been a fan of. I don't overall like the white background in the cars, but it looks decent in my opinion. It's not absolutely horrendous. It's just not the greatest looking paint scheme in my honest opinion, to be perfectly honest with you. The next paint scheme we're going to take a look at is Aric Almirola's 2022 Smithfield scheme, which will be the anchor sponsor for Aric Almirola in 2022, which we'll get to Aric Almirola at the end of the video. But this paint scheme looks really good in my opinion. They do a really good job utilizing the sponsorship placement. They do a really great job. It looks really good, and I'm looking forward to see this paint scheme because, again, I think they did a really good job. They did not give the official number of how many races that this car will have that sponsorship, but I think the paint scheme looks pretty good in my honest and sincere opinion. The next paint scheme we're going to take a look at is Christopher Bell's 2022 Rheem scheme that we'll see in multiple races in 2022. In my honest opinion, I'm not overall the biggest fan of this Rheem paint scheme. It looks not just the color doesn't work perfectly. They don't utilize the sponsorship placement very well. And the number's a little bit too forward for me. So this paint scheme does not look really great. I think this is one of the first few paint schemes that Joe Gibbs Racing has revealed so far that haven't looked really good, which is unfortunately disappointing. But we're going to have to see this car on the racetrack, and we just have to get used to it, and fans will have to get used to it. The next paint scheme we're going to take a look at is Ricky Stenhouse Jr.'s 2022 Irish Body Sprint scheme that we'll see in multiple races in 2022. This paint scheme looks decent in my opinion. I don't entirely like the color of the number on the car, but I do think the colors actually look pretty decent. Again, JTG's had some good paint schemes in the past and not so good paint schemes. I would still put this more into not one of the better paint schemes just because I don't think they do an amazing job with this, but we're going to have to see this car on the racetrack, and hopefully this will give them some good results in 2022. The next paint scheme we're going to take a look at is Kyle Larson's 2022 HenderCars.com scheme. I was really worried about this paint scheme because of the iconic number of the car and also the iconic look of the car. But I will say that this paint scheme actually looks pretty good in my honest opinion. And for me, probably besides the Ally car, probably my favorite Hendrick scheme that has been revealed so far. And I think they do a pretty good job on this paint scheme, in my honest opinion. It's not absolutely perfect. There are things I would change. And at some point, they may have to change up the color because it might end up getting boring for some people. But I think the paint scheme looks pretty decent in my opinion. And I'm pretty good in my opinion. And I'm looking forward to see it out on the racetrack in 2022. The next paint scheme we're going to take a look at is Denny Hamlin's 2022 FedEx scheme. This is Joe Gibbs' resurgence, and they're getting back into their good ways with their paint schemes. This FedEx scheme is fire. One of my favorite paint schemes, especially with the new number placement. One of my favorite paint schemes that has revealed so far. I think they did an excellent job on the utilization of the sponsorship and the placement. I think they did a really good job on that, and I'm looking forward to see this paint scheme out on the racetrack in 2022. It looks really good in my honest opinion. The next paint scheme we're going to take a look at is Kevin Harvick's 2022 Rheem scheme. Compared to the other Rheem scheme, it's night and day. This paint scheme looks really good. The color placement, the colors on it just absolutely match up perfectly. I'm really happy also the Rheem is coming back to sponsor Kevin Harvick because they're going to sponsor him for 3 races in 2022 as well, and I think they did an excellent job on this paint scheme. It looks really great, and I'm looking forward to see this paint scheme out on the racetrack in 2022. And the final paint scheme as of now we're going to look at is Ross Chastain's 2022 Advent Health Scheme, which they have announced a multi-year deal, and they will sponsor Ross Chastain for 6 races in 2022. In my opinion, it looks really, really good. They did a really, really great job on this paint scheme. The numbers not moved too far forward, which I really like that. I don't like the numbers being moved too far forward. I think they did an excellent job on this paint scheme. I think it looks really, really solid, looks really, really great, and I'm looking forward to see this paint scheme out on the racetrack in 2022. I'm happy that they're going back to the sponsorship for 2022, and it looks really, really great in my honest opinion. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next major stories of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Auto Owners Insurance. As Auto Owners Insurance on their website reveals that they are going to sponsor Martin Truex Jr. for 8 races in 2022. The races they'll sponsor Martin Truex Jr. are Richmond, Bristol Dirt, Darlington, Kansas in the spring, Atlanta, Indianapolis Road Course, Michigan, and the Martinsville race, the second to last race of the season. Really good to see that Auto Owners Insurance is continuing their sponsorship. I think that they're cutting back a little bit on how many races they're sponsoring Martin Truex Jr. I think they have more races in 2021 than 2022, but it's still good to see that Auto Owners Insurance still has a good tie with Martin Truex Jr. And again, I'm happy to see that they are continuing to work with them heading into 2022. So overall, very happy to see that Auto Owners Insurance is going to continue working with Martin Truex Jr. for 2022. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the LA Clash, as there was quite a few LA Clash promos that came out during multiple NFL games. Now, there was one that came during the Packers and Lions game, but there's also one during the Sunday Night Football game, I think on Fox or NBC, that was basically shown, and they were basically, there's been a lot of teasers and promos that have been coming out for this. This event, I think, is going to be absolutely massive. There's so much promotion for the LA Clash, and the fact that they continue to put more promotion out for it, I think it's very, very cool to see. So I'm very happy to see that the LA Clash is continuing to get partnership. It's really cool to see that the LA Clash is going to continue having more promotion for their event. I think, again, this event could absolutely be a massive event for 2022. So really happy to see that they continue to put a lot of promotion and excitement into the event for 2022. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Daytona 500 qualifying. Now, there has been a major question in regards to if fans are going to be allowed to be able to access for the Daytona 500 qualifying. Well, the good news for a lot of fans is that fans are going to be allowed into the grandstands for the Daytona 500 qualifying on the 16th. And then for practice on the 15th, fans are going to be allowed in a fan zone. I believe it'll be $20 for each day if you're going into those events. So, because last year, remember, because of the COVID pandemic, COVID pandemic has basically been resurging massively here in the country with the Omicron and the Deltacron variants and all the other variants in the country. But the good news is that they're going to allow fans into this year's Daytona 500 qualifying. I think having fan access is very, very important. So I think it's really good to see that Daytona 500 qualifying will be allowing fans to show up for those events. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Worldwide Technology Raceway. As it was reported by Adam Stern yesterday that says that Worldwide Technology Raceway says grandstand ticket sales are off to a strong start for its June NASCAR weekend. Top tier seats for the Cup race are 60% sold out, while second tier seats are 54% sold. Per Chris Blair, basically is the GM of the racetrack. Meanwhile, for the truck race, top-tier tickets are 50% sold out. Now, for the record, I'm telling you this event is going to sell out. And to give you a number of how many seats are in the Worldwide Technology Raceway track, it holds 78,000 seats. And one thing that the Worldwide Technology Raceway group do and the Bomberito group do especially very, very well is they do a very good job promoting the hell out of these races. If you look at the IndyCar events and the Truck Series events that have happened at the track, they have tended to get a lot of audiences out there. And the fact that Worldwide Technology Raceway is going to have already had 60% sold is really good. I do think they probably have a few more sold, though, if they basically had a little bit tickets were not as expensive. When my dad and I purchased a package, well, my dad purchased a package for me to him to go to the Worldwide Technology Raceway because I'm probably going to be going to that race. And we spent $800. We spent a ton of money on the event. But the good news for us, we don't have to go to a hotel since we're like 35 minutes away from the racetrack. But I think the event's going to sell out, and I think it's going to be a very, very massive event. So really good to see already 60% sold, and for the record, 78,000 people at a Cup race is going to be absolutely insane. I know multiple people that are already going out to that event, so I'm very excited for that race at Worldwide Technology Raceway. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Sonoma Raceway. As Sonoma Raceway announced yesterday that they are going to eliminate the carousel for NASCAR's weekend and return to the 110-lap event on the 1.99-mile course. The stages are going to be 25 for the end of the first stage, and the second stage will end at 55, and then the final stage will be a 55-lap race. They had ran this layout from 1990, I think like 1998 or 1999 up to 2018. Then they went back to the carousel lineup they used to run back in the day for 2019 and 2021. And I think a lot of fans were kind of hit or miss with this racetrack. Now, I will say my personal opinion, I do think the 2021 running of the Sonoma race was one of the most underrated races of the 2021 season, because unlike 2019 where you couldn't pass, in 2021 you actually could pass. That being said, though, I do personally like the decision of them going back to the shorter circuit. But I will give I will say that drivers like Michael McDowell kind of know more what they're talking about. If they want the longer tracks like Box Glen being longer and Sonoma being longer, I don't entirely blame them because those guys have ran road courses, so I can't be mad at their opinions. That being said, though, if it's my opinion, I would go with the shorter course. But again, it's just my personal opinion. I think they made, in my personal opinion, I think they overall made the right call in regards to that. But again, you're all going to have your own personal and different opinions in regards to that. But they look like, it's the end, it's their choice and their opinion to believe what they want. And it's personally, I think they're making the right call to go back to the smaller ovals of smaller track for 2022. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Julie Stefanik. Now, Winston Kelly was on SiriusXM NASCAR radio yesterday, and he had announced a change in format that will allow Julie Stefanik an opportunity to speak at this year's NASCAR Hall of Fame induction ceremony. Now, for a lot of you who have not been following this story, I had gotten many people have been adamantly disgusted at NASCAR and the NASCAR Hall of Fame for not allowing Julie Stefanik to speak. Now, there apparently have been a rule up until now, for about 5 years, where the families were not allowed to speak at the NASCAR Hall of Fame. And I really don't understand why they were not allowed to. But Liz Allison also commented on this too. She's a widow of Davey Allison. You could not speak posthumously for drivers because Mike Stefanik unfortunately passed away. And she basically wrote a really, really good speech. But now it looks like she's going to be able to speak. If she wants to, she will get to speak at the NASCAR Hall of Fame induction ceremony. Winston Kelly, when they made this decision, absolutely earned a lot of people's respect back. And my personal opinion, my respect back too, because honestly, if they would not have let her speak at the NASCAR Hall of Fame, I think NASCAR fans would have been really, really mad at him. But I'm really glad they changed their mind and decided to make the right opinion yesterday. I think they absolutely made a really, really good case, in my opinion, to change it. And I'm happy to see that fans were outraged and basically said, this is absolutely wrong. She needs to be allowed to speak. If you don't let her speak, NASCAR fans are not going to be extremely happy about it. So I'm very happy to see the NASCAR decided to make the right decision in regards to that. And I'm glad they made the right decision for that. And now we're going to go ahead and jump onto the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Bill McAnally Racing's Driver Academy. As it was announced a couple of days ago, that Bill McAnally Racing has elected to discontinue the Bill McAnally Racing Drivers Academy. The team is still offer individuals development opportunities and tailored to each driver's needs and desires. This does not shock me in my honest opinion, because the reason they had the Bill McAnally Drivers Academy is because when they were over at Toyota, and there was so much development at Toyota, that they were looking at who the best drivers could be for the future of the Toyota development program. Remember, Bill McAnally Racing going into 2022, they're going to be going back over to Chevy. I think they used to be a Chevy team back in the day, but they're going to be going back over to Chevy in 2022. So this is why they made the decision in regards to this, to have the Drivers Academy basically discontinued for next year. It's still, again, it does not entirely surprise me that they decided to go this direction. So it's because if you look at the Drivers Academy, you look at the Toyota Development Program, they're going to have to go to some new teams with development programs. Probably soon Venturini is going to be the new development team for drivers coming up into Toyota Development Programs, which means Venturini is going to have to expand their team insanely because there's going to be so many people coming into that development program going forward. But it's definitely interesting that the Bill McAnally Racing's Drivers Academy and those drivers programs are basically going to be gone after this year. Very interesting. We'll have probably more updates in regards to that in the future. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Parker Kligerman and Henderson Motorsports. As there was a Food Country article that came out, and they're going to return to the NASCAR Camping World Truck Series race series for 10 to 11 races for 2022. Now, the races that they have confirmed as of now they are going to run are Daytona, Bristol Dirt, Circuit Americas, Darlington, Bristol Night Race, and Martinsville, the second to last race of the season. This is not surprising. They've usually ran around 8 to 12 races, usually every single year, and they will look to be basically running about half of the NASCAR Camping World Truck Series season in 2022. Really good to see that Parker Kligerman and his team continue to show up. I think they're one of the most underrated teams in the NASCAR Camping World Truck Series, and I think that going into next year, I do think that they will have a pretty strong year considering they've looked really, really fast. Parker Kligerman has looked extremely well. I mean, you look back at the Cup Series race with Gaunt Brothers, he did really, really well with the Gaunt Brothers, and I think that he will do exceptionally well with this team next year. So I'm looking forward to see what they can do. I think they'll contend for some top 5s and some top 10s for sure next year. I think they're going to have the speed to keep up with that, and I'm happy to see that they are going to continue having those partnerships. And I'm happy overall to see that they are going to be continuing to race in the NASCAR Camping World Truck Series in 2022. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Parker Chase. As was announced yesterday, that Parker Chase is going to drive the 15 for Venturini Motorsports in 2022 for 10 races. He'll run 9 main ARCA races, and then in the ARCA East Series, he will run 1 race, I think at Phoenix International Race. I think the season finale for that, he will run the final race with Venturini Motorsports. Parker Chase has basically ran select races in the Toyota development program. He actually has made a couple truck series starts for Kyle Busch Motorsports, albeit his performances have not been really that impressive with the 51 truck, but he's getting a little more experience, and now he's part of that Toyota development program. In my opinion, I think this is a really, really strong move, but he's going to be in a very, very competitive car, and he's going to be expected to do really, really well with the Venturini camp heading into 2022, but he's going to have a really good car, and there is a lot of talent this year coming into the Toyota stables. So hopefully Parker Chase can do really, really well next year. I like to see Parker Chase have a very strong year. I think anyone like to see anyone especially do very well in their respective equipment, in their respective series. So good luck to Parker Chase heading into 2022. I hope he does really, really well, and hopefully he will do well enough to have a great year with the Venturini Motorsports camp heading into the 2022 season. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Penske and Indianapolis Motor Speedway. There was an article that came out, I think, from Racers.com, and they were talking about what Roger Penske's plans are for Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And Roger Penske basically outlined Indianapolis Motor Speedway's future upgrades and some things that are going to be coming to Indianapolis Motor Speedway. They plan to repaint the Turn 4 tower surface. There are going to be 4 new street bridges for the golf course coming, and they are going to be fixing the curbs for the Cup Series race when they return for 2022. Remember, Indianapolis Motor Speedway Road Course is what track NASCAR's Cup Series is going to be running. Penske's vision is really, really good, and you look at some of the things that are going on. They were testing some cars at night at Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Some people were not happy with certain people who were talking about that, but there is a ton of talk about Indianapolis Motor Speedway in the future of that racetrack, and they're working on major for the facility, and you look at what Roger Penske's vision is for Indianapolis Motor Speedway as he currently runs it, and I think that the Indianapolis Motor Speedway is going to have some massive products and other things they've not revealed in that article that they're probably working on. I think they're going to want to run a 24-hour race at some point. That's why they were testing a endurance car at that racetrack. So I'm really happy to see that Roger Penske is going to have these upgrades coming, and I think that these upgrades are going to be massive for the future of this track. So that's something that's really, really exciting, and I'm looking forward to see what other future plans they have in store for these groups going forward. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Kyle Weatherman. As was announced on Friday, that Kyle Weatherman has parted ways with McAnally Racing for the 2022 season. Kyle Weatherman apparently may have a team he's going to for 2022. We're not sure yet, but this honestly is very, very surprising, because Kyle Weatherman has been with the McAnally Racing Group since 2018, 2019, and this is a team that really helped out Kyle Weatherman get a really good start in his NASCAR career, and has helped him stay in there for a long time. And I will say that Kyle Weatherman has been really, really impressive with this group. I think he's done really, really good. I think Kyle Weatherman is a very, very talented driver who's had some pretty impressive performances, especially with this McAnally Racing Group. And wherever he goes next year, I think he'll do very, very well. The other big question is, what's the future for McAnally Racing? Because the fact that they're not going to be returning to work with Kyle Weatherman next year is absolutely shocking and absolutely surprising. So we're going to have to wait and see in regards to what happens with Kyle Weatherman heading in the next year where he's going to. But this definitely, when this was announced on Friday, this definitely was one of the most shocking announcements that got revealed. So we're going to have to wait and see what happens with Kyle Weatherman heading into 2022, where he ends up. I hope he ends up in a good ride with the team somewhere. Maybe he goes part-time with like Junior Motorsports or something like that. Maybe he's going to Sam Hunt Racing for all we know, even though there's talk that Jeffrey Earnhardt might go there next year. But it's good to see the Kyle Weatherman. It sucks that Kyle Weatherman's not returning to McAnally Racing, but he's probably going to end up somewhere better anyways for 2022. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Andy Lally, as he also announced that he has parted ways with Alpha Prime Racing for 2022. Now, Andy Lally apparently has somewhere he's going to, and the good news, it seems like that this partnership was mutually agreed. Andy Lally apparently said he chose himself to leave the organization, and Tommy Joe Mars had no hard feelings toward them. I don't think there was any hard feelings toward Kyle Weatherman and the McAnally Racing Group, but Andy Lally, there was no hard feelings toward that team for next year. So Andy Lally was supposed to run all the road course races, and I think that Sage Karam now will most likely run all the road course races with the Alpha Prime Racing Group. But imagine if Andy Lally drove for Alpha Prime Racing, how good this team would be, especially on road courses. But I wonder if Andy Lally may end up going into that 88 car for Junior Motorsports. I just think that there's a possibility he could end up at Junior Motorsports next year, which is why he probably left. He apparently may have gotten a better opportunity. But the big question now is who's going to end up filling his place, because now they're getting a lot of drivers on their team. You've got Sage Karam coming over to the team next year. You've got Raj who could run some road course races. You've got other drivers like Cesar Baccarella, who's I think still indefinitely suspended right now, and Tommy Joe, among other drivers who could get opportunities with the teams. Apparently, there's other drivers in the future that are going to be announced for the Alpha Prime Racing Group next year. So it's definitely interesting that Alpha Prime Racing and Andy Lally have parted ways for 2022, and we'll have to wait and see what happens in regards to the future of that. But that's the story in regards to that. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Frankie Munoz. As Frankie Munoz is looking to start a ARCA/NASCAR team for 2022, and it is called Munoz Racing. For those of you who do not know, Frankie Munoz is an actor who was basically a child actor who was in shows like Malcolm in the Middle. Malcolm in the Middle was a very successful show for many, many years, among other shows that he participated in the ABC group. And it was also, I think, I don't remember what movies he's been in. I think Agent Cody Banks or something. I think that he was in that movie. He's also had memory problems in the past too. But Frankie Munoz has basically been someone who's been carving his way into some sort of the racing world. He's actually got his license, actually racing some late models very recently last year. And he's going to be competing in basically going to be looking to start an ARCA team. He wants to actually get into NASCAR one day. It's really cool to see that Frankie Munoz is looking to get into the sport of racing. Because if you have more people you can get in the sport of racing, in my opinion, the better it's going to be for everybody a long term down the road. But at the same time, how competitive will he be? I'm honestly not sure. Usually people who don't really have experience when it comes to racing, they don't end up doing very, very well. So I'm not entirely sure how he's going to do with the team. I hope he does well. I hope they do actually show up and have the sponsorship to show up and capabilities to show up in 2022. Because if they can do that, I think that'd be really, really great. And I think that'd be overall awesome if that could happen for everybody. So hopefully they do he actually does show up. And hopefully if he does, he can do really, really well to help this team out going into next year. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Renee Gracie. As Renee Gracie is considering U.S. racing operations, including NASCAR, and is looking at other forms of racing as well. To give a backstory on Renee Gracie, she's someone that is on OnlyFans, has made a lot of money on OnlyFans. Again, she's doing what she wants to do. She's doing really, really good on that. Good for her on that part. One thing to note, though, she also is a racer as well. And she actually competed in V8, basically competed in Supercars, the Australian Supercar Series. But her stats are not very, very impressive, to be perfectly honest with you. She's not been really, really impressive. But honestly, if she wants to come over and race in the U.S. and race in her forms, so be it. If she wants to come race in her motorsports, so be it. I don't care what she does in her personal time. If she wants to do OnlyFans stuff, who really, really cares at this point? But all I care about is how is she going to do over in the motorsports. If she can do really, really well, I think that'd be great for everybody. Again, I'm a little concerned about her just because she's not been really impressive in VA Supercars. I looked up a lot of her stats. Her stats have not been impressive, including in some of the Bathurst 1000s she has competed in the past. But if she shows up and impresses everybody, I think that'd be great for everybody. But honestly, I'm a little skeptical on her just because of the fact that she has not been impressive. Again, I want to make this clear. I'm talking about her stats on the track. I'm not talking about her personal stuff. But at the same time, if she does come over, I think it'd be great for everybody if she could do extremely well. So good luck to her. Hopefully she does really, really well. She comes over. Again, she's looking to come over and race in NASCAR, and maybe she will come up and race in NASCAR. But honestly, I'm not entirely sure if she's going to come through on that part, to be perfectly honest with you. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about lgbcoin. As it was announced on Saturday that lgbcoin has announced a 2-year endorsement deal with Brandon Brown for publicity events, videos, crypto conferences, racing-related events, etc. News release says partnership an 8-figure deal. Logos cannot be on the car uniform at NASCAR events because NASCAR's denial of use at its events. To give a massive backstory, we've talked about this on the channel for so long. It looks like it's basically over at this point in regards to the lgbcoin situation. For a while, it was announced in December 30th, the day where it's going to be a partnership with lgbcoin, but then that got denied, and then basically it was back and forth between NASCAR and lgbcoin, and then basically NASCAR announced that they were not going to allow it after, I think, the guy, the owner of James Kudelis, they're going to give $5 million to Brandon, at least $5 million. I think it's like $10 or $12 million they're giving to Brandon Brown, which is going to be good money for them. Unclear what's going on with sponsorship. There have been talk that Larry's Hard Lemonade maybe is looking to sponsor him still, but now it looks like that's going to be off the table for that because they basically denied the use of that sponsorship. This story was one of the biggest stories at the beginning of the year, no doubt about it, and it looks like it's reached its end as lgbcoin now is going to have an endorsement deal. Now, one thing to note is that because of the current situation of the lgbcoin, don't entirely be surprised if they have issues in tech because of the lgbcoin situation. Now, my personal opinion, I don't think that tech should be affected by what happens on and off the racetrack. But at the same time, if you're, of course, partnering up with these kind of sponsorships, it does cause a lot of controversy and a lot of people overall talk about it. But at least he's going to have money. Hopefully the money and checks clear. Hopefully they do have the money again. They were planning to get $5 million. But we'll have to wait and see if those checks overall clear. So that's a big story. At least it looks like as of now, may have finally reached its conclusion, but we're not entirely sure if it's ever going to reach its conclusion a long term down the road. So this story looks like it may have come to an end, but we're not entirely sure, to be perfectly honest with you. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Eddie Tristanos. As Eddie Tristanos the other day, about a week ago, was arrested on second-degree assault charges stemming from an incident with spotter Clayton Hughes in Talladega. To give a backstory on the situation, Eddie Tristanos is basically the husband of Jennifer Jo Cobb. And I believe that Clayton Hughes may have been the spotter for the 75 car for another team at Talladega. And apparently there had been an altercation in the fight that apparently had taken place where Clayton Hughes apparently may have gotten paralyzed and gotten extremely hurt from Eddie Tristanos. And Clayton Hughes apparently had basically sent out the charges against Eddie Tristanos. Eddie Tristanos, of course, has had a really big kind of history of not being one of the nicest guys out there. Of course, he's a crew chief, I think, for Austin himself, which should basically tell a lot of story about the interesting story about Eddie Tristanos. But at the same time, it's definitely crazy to think that he got arrested for that. Again, as of right now, for alleged assault, even though, let's be for real, there was a fight that happened. Everyone knows about the altercation that took place after Talladega. There was a lot of people, including people and drivers, were not very happy with the actions of Eddie Tristanos at the team Jennifer Jo Cobb, because she really drove straight into Parker Kligerman, and there were people that were not very happy with that situation. So this story is definitely interesting, definitely crazy overall, and maybe more will come out for this for sure. But it's crazy to think that at this point that this story has continued to turn into one of the most craziest stories, and we'll see probably more updates on it in the future in regards to that. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Austin Cindric. As Austin Cindric is going to compete in the Rolex 24 at Daytona this year, racing for the GT Pro Group. I believe that Austin Cindric is the only NASCAR driver as of now, unless Chase Elliott enters into it. I think he's entering it, but Austin Cindric, I believe, is the only NASCAR driver that is going to be competing in this year's Rolex 24 at Daytona. Austin Cindric, of course, has raced in the Rolex 24 at Daytona multiple times, getting more experience on road courses and getting prepared. He's going to be running for FullTime Racing, which I think that team will be a pretty solid team heading into the 2022 season for the Rolex 24. Would not be surprised if this team competes for the overall victory. Of course, they're going to be running in the main GTD class. You're going to have to be the Corvette group next year. You're also probably going to have to be guys like I think the Vassar Sullivan group is part of the GTD Pro class as well. So you're going to have to be the Vassar Sullivan group as well. The Acras and all the other teams are going to be competing in that as well. But he's going to have a really strong chance to win it this year with the FullTime Racing group. And again, I hope he does really well and can perform extremely well in this year's Rolex 24s. I think if he can do that, I think that'd be really good. And hopefully, he can do really well in this year's Rolex 24. And hopefully, they can complete and finish every single lap here in 2022's Rolex 24. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Timmy Hill. As it was announced this morning that Timmy Hill is going to attempt to qualify for this year's Daytona 500, driving to 66 for MBM Motorsports. This is not surprising. It's been expected that Timmy Hill is going to drive the 66 car for the Daytona 500. But by the way, the sponsor that they're using, the partnership and the scheme looks really, really good. In my honest opinion, I think did a really, really good job on the paint scheme for that. But one thing I'm really, really glad to see is that Timmy Hill is, again, attempting to qualify for the 500. And it's good to see that NBM Motorsports is showing up. There have been big questions in regards to entry list for this year's Daytona 500. And as of now, there are expected as of now 39 cars for the 500. But there are potentially more cars that could show up. Bob Pockers reported this past week that there could be as many as 43 that could show up, but as low as 40 that could show up. I think we're going to get to about 40 cars for this year's Daytona 500, but it's good to see that Timmy Hill and NBM Motorsports are going to once again show up for this year's Daytona 500. Again, the more cars that can show up for this year's Daytona 500, I think the better it is going to be for everybody. So I'm very happy to see that they're going to attempt the Daytona 500 once again. I think if they don't, I think that they will make it to this year's show. They've seemed to always be really, really fast. So good luck to them heading into this year's Daytona 500. Hopefully they can qualify for this year's Daytona 500. So good luck to them heading into 2022. I don't know what other drivers are going to drive the team, but there might be more that drive for this team, including Boris Sapp. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the College crew chief lineup that was revealed on Saturday for the Cup Series and the Xfinity Series lineups. Let's start off with the Cup Series. For Justin Haley, he's going to be getting Ryan Preece's old crew chief, Trent Owens, who will come over to College Racing in 2022. For AJ Allmendinger, Noah Gragson, Daniel Hemrick were in the 16 car. Master Cersei, who I believe was the crew chief last year for the 16 car at the team, he will be the crew chief for them once again. For the NASCAR Xfinity Series, Landon Castle will have Justin Trinchero, who I believe was the crew chief last year, I think, for AJ Allmendinger, if I remember correctly. Daniel Hemrick will have Alex Johnson, who was a crew chief for the 11 last year. And AJ Allmendinger will have Bruce Schlegel, who was Jeb Burton's crew chief last year as well. This is a very, very solid crew chief lineup. Trent Owens, I think, is a pretty decent crew chief. He's not amazing, but I think he's a pretty decent crew chief, and I think he'll do a really, really good job working with Justin Haley next year. Master Dorsey, of course, did a really, really good job in the Cup Series. Like I mentioned, I think he was the guy who was the crew chief for AJ Allmendinger when they won the Indianapolis Motor Speedway road course race, the race that turned into a bloodbath, and this is kind of a crazy shit fest, a really, really big shit fest, and it was crazy to see that event, but he was a crew chief for that. They changed up the Xfinity Series lineup. Alex Johnson, of course, was working with Justin Haley, won 3 or 4 races last year, and now they've got Daniel Hemrick. And again, I think that this crew chief lineup overall is really, really good, and it is very, very impressive. And again, I like this crew chief lineup a lot. I think that they did a really good job assigning all the crew chiefs of people that are working with the team for 2022. Very excited about this, and I overall, in my personal opinion, like this crew chief lineup for sure. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about SS Greenlight Racing. As was announced on Friday late afternoon, that SS Greenlight Racing has formed a technical alliance with Stewart-Haas Racing. They will switch over to Ford for 2022. Joe Graf Jr. will drive full-time in the 07 car in 2022, and there will be a second car that is going to show up next year. Cole Custer will drive in 4 races for the team, and Chase Briscoe will drive in 1 race. Now, they did not announce anything in regards to Aric Almirola or Kevin Harvick. I would expect that potentially those guys could run in this car, and I would not be surprised if Ryan Preece gets into this car as well. This right here does not surprise me, considering SS Greenlight has had a partnership with Rick Ware Racing this past year. And, of course, Rick Ware Racing, they are partnering up with SHR for 2022. And I think Rick Ware's kind of part of this SS Greenlight team in some aspect as well. I would also expect that potentially other drivers who are part of the Rick Ware Racing group will probably get into this ride. And also, like I mentioned, Ryan Preece will get into there as well. Overall, I think this is a massive, massive pickup for the SS Greenlight Racing Group. This team has a pretty good opportunity here to potentially have a very strong year in the NASCAR Cup Xfinity Series. Hopefully they can improve. Because, again, their team hasn't been really, really great. Again, the 17 cars performed decent, but Joe Graf Jr. has not performed exceptionally well through the years. So hopefully overall in 2022 they can perform very, very well. This is a pretty big pickup in regards to partnerships for next year. Again, hopefully it goes very, very well for the team, and hopefully going into 2022 they can have a big year. And again, hopefully they can do well enough to have a big year in 2022 in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. But let's be for real, I'm not entirely sure how they're going to do heading into 2022. Now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to take a look at one more paint scheme that just got revealed a few minutes ago, as Tyler Reddick announced an anchor sponsor with a company called 3Chi. This paint scheme looks pretty good in my honest opinion. I think did a really, really good job with the color scheme of the car. I think it looks really, really impressive. Again, they will sponsor Tyler Reddick for a majority of races this year. Apparently, it's a multi-year deal with Tyler Reddick this year. Again, Tyler Reddick's contract does end at the end of 2022. However, I do believe that Tyler Reddick is going to get extended for 2022. So overall, I think the paint scheme looks really, really exciting, looks really, really impressive. I've seen some people already give this paint scheme not the greatest reviews, but I think it looks pretty good in my honest and sincere opinion, and it's a breaking paint scheme that just got built a few minutes ago, and it looks pretty decent in my honest opinion. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk again about Bill McAnally Racing, as they have finalized their lineup for the Truck Series for 2022. Derek Cross, no surprise, will return to the 19 truck in 2022 with Shane Wilson as his crew chief once again, and Colby Howard will drive the 91, so they're basically alternate numbers from 19 to 91, and he will drive the 91 with Mark Hillman, who crew chief for Derek Cross quite a bit in 2021. He will work with Colby Howard in 2022. Overall, I think this lineup is pretty good in my honest opinion. I think they did a really good job setting up this lineup in the future for this team heading into next year. And again, I think the lineup is really, really good. And I'm really happy for both drivers. I think both drivers are really, really good. I know that Derek Cross in 2021 absolutely kind of struggled and kind of was a little bit over his head throughout the year, but you cannot deny his talent. Derek Cross is a really, really good driver. And I think Colby Howard also is a talented driver who ran pretty well in select races from other organizations, including the 9 truck. And I think both drivers have a pretty good year. I'm looking forward to see what they can do, because if they can do really, really well, I think it'd be great for their organization. So hopefully they can do well for these teams heading next year. Good luck to Bill McAnally Racing heading into 2022. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Juan Pablo Montoya. As once again, Juan Pablo Montoya is going to compete in the Indianapolis 500 and the Grand Prix of Indianapolis Motor Speedway for, you guessed it, Aric McLaren SP in the number 86 truck. 86 car, excuse me. Very excited to see that Juan Montoya is going to be back at the Indianapolis 500, but it does not surprise me considering Juan Montoya has already in the past driven for this team. He drove for them last year. I think he ended up finishing the race and qualifying for both of the events and did pretty well in those select events as well. And I think that he is one of the best and most talented drivers out there, one of the greatest drivers in the world, probably one of the best at race. Unfortunately, a lot of people make a lot of jokes on with Jeff Fire and Juan Pablo Montoya, so I think the jokes are stupid, but in my opinion, a guy like Juan Montoya, bringing him back to Indianapolis 500 with Aric McLaren SP, is also going to be a great coach next year for both of the drivers at the team, Felix Rosenqvist and Pablo Ward. Pablo Ward, I think, almost won the Indianapolis 500 this past year, and Felix Rosenqvist, unfortunately, had issues late in the event. But hopefully going into this year's Indy 500 can be like a good driving coach. And again, having him back at Aric McLaren SP is really, really exciting. Having a really talented driver come back to a team that he's known and is comfortable with is really, really good. And I think he could be an underdog to win this year's Indianapolis 500 and win his 3rd ever Indianapolis 500s. He's got 2. He'll be looking to become one of the few drivers that have won 3 Indianapolis 500s. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Ty Gibbs. As Ty Gibbs looks like it is finally confirmed that Ty Gibbs is officially going to be driving full-time with Joe Gibbs Racing in 2022, driving the number 54 car. Not surprising, to be honest with you. It's been kind of expected that Ty Gibbs is already going to drive with this team full-time. We just didn't know the number, but they basically, the way that they kind of announced it, it looks like, again, they didn't finalize it, but kind of the way they announced it, and no surprise, but again, kind of the way they announced this is really, really crazy and really, really interesting, because it kind of looks like they're looking for crypto sponsorships. The reason that they haven't officially finalized it themselves at this point is probably because they're struggling for sponsorship for Ty. Ty Gibbs is no secret that Ty Gibbs has kind of struggled for sponsorship throughout his NASCAR career so far because of the issues of his sponsorship, because Rowdy sponsors Kyle Busch and Monster Energy sponsors Ty Gibbs, and Monster's not been really able to, unfortunately, sponsor Ty throughout his NASCAR career, and he's had issues finding other sponsors. So they're trying to find whatever sponsor they can for Ty Gibbs, but I want to talk about Ty Gibbs' expectations, because his expectations in 2022 are going to be very, very high for him. So I think Ty Gibbs is going to be a championship threat, no doubt about it. But of course, he's going to have to go up against guys like AJ Allmendinger. He's going to have to go against guys like Josh Berry, Noah Gragson, even his teammate Brandon Jones, Daniel Hemrick, Landon Castle. The name of drivers and the caliber of drivers he's going to have to go up against in 2022 is going to be very, very high. But I think he will be a threat to win the championship this year. I think he's going to be very, very fast, is going to have a lot of pace, and I'm really excited to see what he can do in 2022. And if I'm going full time, is really, really good. I think he's going to win at least 5 to 6 races this year. He's going to have a little more competition because Xfinity's, like I said, a stack this year. But I think he's going to do really, really well in 2022 in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. And again, I'm very happy to see that Ty Gibbs is going to be returning to Xfinity on a full-time basis. We've been expecting it, but I'm happy to see that Ty Gibbs is going to return to the NASCAR Xfinity Series in 2022. And now we're going to jump on to the first of 3 major stories of today's episode, as we are talking about Dale Earnhardt Jr. As Dale Earnhardt Jr., it was announced yesterday that he will be testing the next-gen car at Daytona, and he'll test the 5 for Hendrick Motorsports. As this video is, you're probably currently watching this video, the test is going on as we speak in Daytona. They'll be testing from 12 to 8 today, and they also will be testing tomorrow from 9 to 5 p.m. Eastern, so 8 to 4 Central Time for me, 11 to 7 p.m. Central Time is when they'll be testing. But the reason that Dale Jr. is testing the car, not Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott, or Alex Bowman, the reason that they are not testing the car is because currently they are competing at this year's Chili Bowl Nationals right now, and William Byron is the only driver that is not going to be racing in the Chili Bowl this year. Currently, as we speak, the Chili Bowl is going on. You've got Chase Elliott, Kyle Larson almost want to get Justin Grant in the VIROC, the Victorial Race of Champions. But having Dale Jr. come back, a driver that, again, has not raced in the Cup Series since 2017, a driver that has, of course, been racing in the past, having a guy like him come back and at least test an action car is really, really awesome to see. That you have a guy like Dale Jr. And one thing that has been happening, especially over the last few years, one thing we've noticed is we've seen a lot of drivers who've kind of been out of retirement who've been looking to potentially make some one-off returns in NASCAR. You look at guys like Carl Edwards, who've said that maybe he's been kind of interested in an action car, though let's be real, he's probably not going to return. But Carl Edwards, he's been interested in the next-gen car. You've got Jacques Villeneuve who's looking to run the Daytona 500, and you've got Borsted, who probably, if sponsorship comes through, he's probably going to run some NASCAR Cup Series races on road courses this year. So I'm really happy to see that Dale Jr. is looking to come back and race, and potentially maybe he comes back and runs a one-off Cup race. Again, maybe if Junior Motorsports jumps up the Cup Series like I think they will in 2023, maybe Dale Jr. is looking at doing that. But having Dale Jr. come back, he's going to bring a lot of insight to the Hendrick camp. He'll give a lot of good information, and because of course Dale Jr. has tested the next-gen car, and he's what this also is going to do for Junior, especially when he gets up in the broadcast booth this year again. He's going to be able to explain a lot more about this next-gen car, and I think having a guy like Dale Jr., who's raced at super speedways throughout his career, has been extremely good at super speedways, having him there is going to be really, really fun. So overall, I think this is very, very exciting news, and I'm happy to see that Dale Jr. is testing an action car today and tomorrow. And now we'll go ahead and jump on to the next major story of today's episode, as we are talking about Josh Bilicki. As Josh Bilicki is officially confirmed that he will drive the 77 for Spire Motorsports in 2022, but instead of running full-time in the 77 car, he will run a majority of the races in the 77 car. His first start will take place at Auto Club. I would assume that he will probably run around 24 to 30 races. I would assume he's going to run almost all the races, but not every single race, which tells me a couple possibilities of who could be running the Daytona 500 in the 77 car. But let's first talk about Josh Bilicki for what I think could be getting into the 77 car for the Daytona 500, a couple of candidates that could be running it. Josh Bilicki absolutely deserves this opportunity with Spire Motorsports. I think he's a guy that's really kicked ass, especially at the Rick Ware group. I know his average finish and his finishes have not been too impressive, but you have to remember that with Rick Ware Racing, the team in 2021 is not the same team as they were coming into next year. They're going to be a better team in 2022. And I think Josh Bilicki, and look at Spire Motorsports and how much they progressed, especially at the end of 2021, how much better they got. I think that he is going to be really have a pretty solid year with this team. It would not surprise me if he somehow gets some top 10s or some top 15s throughout the year. I think he's going to do very, very well with this team going into 2022. I really think he's going to have a really big year with this team. So I hope he does well. I like to see him have good runs. I think he's also going to be one of the clean drivers. And one thing with the next-gen car, that's one thing that's going to be very, very important, especially is having these guys who are going to be cleaner drivers out there because of the shortage of supply. Having him out there be your driver, I think is going to be major and is going to help out their team. So I think he's going to be a major asset to Spire Motorsports. I think he's going to do well. And I think eventually he'll go full-time. Seeger also, which J-Now is going to be sponsoring, and other sponsors are going to be working with him throughout the year next year. The other big question is, who's going to run the Daytona 500? There are a few candidates who could run the 500. Of course, you've got Jamie McMurray. Jamie McMurray is currently at Fox Sports, but he's also driven for the 77 for Spire Motorsports in the past. Now, Chip Ganassi Racing is no longer in NASCAR anymore because they're going to be in IndyCar and other types of forms of motorsports right now. So, unfortunately, he won't be potentially running the Daytona 500, but honestly, not him. Maybe Kaz Gralla. Kaz Gralla has tested a 0-0 for Starcom Racing, and originally they were supposed to acquire the Starcom Racing charter. Maybe Kaz Gralla is being considered. There's talk that Kaz will probably run for Young's Motorsports in the Truck Series next year. There's talk that that's probably going to happen, but there's possibly maybe Kaz Gralla. Maybe another driver we're not thinking about right now. Maybe like Justin Allgaier, perhaps, is potentially going to get an opportunity in the 77 for Spire Motorsports since he's driven it in the past. Maybe Josh Berry. Josh Berry's running full-time in Xfinity, but he drove a couple starts for Spire Motorsports, and they've got a Hendrick partnership in Junior Motorsports. Of course, they got a Hendrick partnership because Rick Hendrick technically owns the team. We'll have to wait and see who gets into that ride. But like I said, I think that this is a massive pickup for Spire Motors to bring Josh Bilicki in. You're going to have two drivers you can really work with to help develop your team. Corey LaJoie is a driver that I think is very underrated, and I also think Josh Bilicki is very underrated. And you look at the age of Josh Bilicki. Josh Bilicki is only 26 years old, so he's got so much time in his career. I think he's about to hit the prime and peak of his NASCAR Cup Series career. He's done well in underfunded rides throughout his career, and I think going into 2022, I think he could have a pretty big year in the NASCAR Cup Series with Spire. We'll have to wait and see how he does, but I'm overall very happy to see that he is going to drive for Spire Motorsports in 2022. I think it's a massive upgrade for him heading into next year. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the final major story of today's episode, as we are talking about Aric Almirola. As was announced yesterday in shocking fashion, that Aric Almirola is going to retire from NASCAR Cup Series competition after the 2022 season. And the reason he stated is that he wants to spend more time with his family and wants to focus on family, and he feels like he's done enough in his NASCAR Cup Series career. Like I said, it was very, very shocking announcement yesterday when this was revealed that Aric Almirola was going to be retiring from NASCAR. But Aric Almirola is 38 or 39 years old. Aric Almirola, I believe, is 38 right now. He will be 39, I think, in 2022, which I didn't think he was that old. I thought he was only 35 or 36. So, I thought he was a little bit younger than he is. He's almost 40 years old. And you think about Aric Almirola. Aric Almirola has been competing in NASCAR at some point since 2006. He made his debut in NASCAR back in 2006. He was originally a development driver for Joe Gibbs Racing. Then after that whole debacle in Milwaukee, where he still was credited with the victory, he left the team after 2007 and went over to DEI in 2008. And then he basically went back to Xfinity, worked over Junior Motorsports, ran for Kyle Busch Motorsports in 2010, almost won the championship there. Then, of course, in 2011, he went over to Junior Motorsports. Then in 2012, jumped up to the Cup Series with Richard Petty Motorsports from 2012 basically to 2017 after he had that really terrible wreck. Finished year and then went over to Stewart-Haas Racing from 2018 and will run his final year in 2022. Aric Almirola has 3 career NASCAR Cup Series victories at this point, and hopefully Aric Almirola can close out this year by picking up a victory in 2022, because even though Aric Almirola's had kind of a quiet career throughout his career, I think he's had a pretty solid career. Now, do I think Aric Almirola is a NASCAR Hall of Famer like some people think he is? Absolutely not. Aric Almirola only won 3 Cup Series races, and let's be real, 2 of them are Super Speedway victories, and only winning 3 races, unless you're a champion of NASCAR, you're probably not going to get into the NASCAR Hall of Fame. Even his stats in trucks and Xfinity are not going to be able to back him up into the NASCAR Hall of Fame, if that makes any sense. That being said, though, I think it's crazy to think that Aric Almirola is going into retirement, and the fact that he's going to retirement is definitely unfortunate. I know that I completely forgot about this too, though, but I think he said this last year at Dover after how many wrecks he had early in the year. Aric Almirola did say that he doesn't know how many more hits he can take, and you look at him and think about how, like I said, how much older he is. He wants to spend more time with his family. You got to commend him for that. I think he is, again, I think he's making a good decision. I'm not mad at Aric Almirola. I think if he wants to spend more time with his family, it's his choice. I don't think anybody should be mad at him for wanting to spend more time with his family. I think family is one of the most important things in life, and spending time with your kids and stuff is very, very important. But I do have Aric Almirola can come back for some one-off starts. I don't think he ruled out the possibility of maybe making maybe some one-off starts in the future. Maybe he comes back at some point and does a couple one-off starts. But I understand why he made the decision to try to focus on his family. Now the other big question is, who takes over the 10 car after 2022? A lot of drivers could take this ride. Most obvious, and I think the number one choice is going to be Ryan Preece. Ryan Preece was announced last week that Ryan Preece is going to be jumping in as a reserve driver for Stewart-Haas Racing. I know a lot of people think that Ryan Preece could take over for Kevin Harvick after 2023. Another driver could take over for him. But I think Ryan Preece potentially could be the driver who goes into that 10 car. Now, the big question is sponsorship. Is Smithfield going to stay with the team after 2022? Because really one of the big reasons they came over to SHR is because they've had a long-term partnership with Aric Almirola really since since 2011, 2012. They've had a massive partnership with Aric Almirola for many, many years. And I'm not sure if they're going to stay with SHR after 2022. I think they could leave after 2022. But I think Ryan Preece is potentially going to be the favorite to go into that 10 car next year. There are other drivers, though, to potentially consider who potentially get into that 10 car. One driver maybe all out of nowhere could get into the ride, maybe Tyler Reddick. Tyler Reddick has got a contract with Richard Childress Racing right now through 2020 through the 2022 season. And I know people bring up maybe he goes and takes over to 10 car in 2022-3. He would be a good pickup in my opinion, but I think that he will most likely stay with RCR. Another driver people bring up is Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. There's been a lot of rumors he was going to go over to the 10 car after 2022. I was told he was going to go over to the 10 car after 2021, go to there in 2022. We all thought that was potentially going to happen. He's going to go over to the 10. And he has basically is under the Kevin Harvick Incorporated management, same management that Ryan Preece is under, Harrison Burton is under, among other drivers. He potentially could be a candidate for that. Another driver is Harrison Burton. Harrison Burton has a driver that is basically under the KHI manager group, and he jumped into the Ford group after this year. And I also think people bring up Riley Herbst. And Riley Herbst also could be a big possibility considering he has Monster Energy backing and sponsorship. But I don't think Riley Herbst is going to jump up the Cup. And honestly, I don't think he's ready for Cup. Even if he takes a massive improvement and wins a lot of races this year, I don't think he's ready for the Cup Series at all. I don't think he's ready. He's not really proved himself throughout his career. So to me, the most obvious choice is Ryan Preece. I think Ryan Preece is also a little bit older when you think about it. And I think he will get into this ride after 2023. And that other big question is what happens with Kevin Harvick. Honestly, I'm not sure what happens with Kevin Harvick at this point, but we'll have to wait and see in regards to this. But man, seeing Aric Almirola go into retirement is absolutely crazy. You think about all the caliber of drivers that are retiring and all the drivers that I've grown up watching over the years. Guys like Tony Stewart retiring, like Ryan Newman potentially out of the sport, Dale Jr. really retiring full-time competition, Jeff Gordon. It's crazy to think all these drivers that are going into retirement right now. And I hope that Aric Almirola can have a big send-off year and can have a big year in the NASCAR Cup Series. I hope he can get a win this year. So I hope he can I don't want him to send it up on a really, really bad note. Hopefully Aric Almirola can have a big year, and hopefully he can do well in 2022. So, anyway, that is today's long NASCAR news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notification on to be notified when a video does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Let's go over that and combo your thoughts on today's video. How do you think Aric Almirola will do in his final full-time season? Do you think he'll do very, very well or not? Let me know in the comments below. And what are your thoughts on all the other stories discussed here today on the channel? Let me know that in the comments below. I've got maybe some special products that are on the way really, really soon as we heat up toward the end of the NASCAR offseason. We are 26 days away from technically the season starting, and I'm looking forward to the season getting started. But anyway, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's video, and I'll see you guys next time for some more great and awesome NASCAR and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.